You know when you're scrolling through your phone, have you ever noticed that pretty much every single game ad looks, well, like a cartoon? It's kind of weird, right? In a world where big budget games are chasing photorealism, the ads that are actually grabbing our attention are doing the exact opposite. So what's going on here? Let's break it down.
It all starts with this number, 1.7 seconds. According to all the market research, that's the average time a brand has to hook you before your thumb just keeps on moving. That's it. It is an unbelievably tiny window of opportunity.
And that brings us to the big puzzle we're tackling in this explainer. With console games pouring millions into looking just like real life, why does this bold, simple, almost childlike style completely own the mobile ad space? Well, the answer is this really fascinating mix of human psychology and some cold, hard technical efficiency.
To really get this, we first have to think about how our brains work when we're in that scrolling zone. Just casually flicking through stuff on a tiny screen. It is a completely different world from, say, sitting down in front of a giant TV fully focused. A lot of it comes down to what designers call the squint test. And the idea is actually super simple. If you can squint your eyes at an image and still tell what's going on, it's a pass. Cartoonish art is basically built from the ground up to ace this test. It's made for you to understand it instantly, even with just a quick, distracted glance. And this is where you can really see the difference, right? On the left, you've got realistic art. All those subtle details and fancy lighting effects, they just turn into a blurry, muddy mess on a phone screen. But on the right, the cartoon style, bam, the bold lines, the high contrast. Your brain immediately knows what the action is and what you're supposed to be looking at. This whole thing plugs directly into a concept called cognitive load. The easiest way to think about it is like your brain's own CPU, its processing power. And when you're just casually scrolling, that power is running on low. You're not looking to solve any complex puzzles. And that's exactly why this works so well. Realism is, well, it's mentally expensive. Your brain has to work harder to make sense of all those tiny details. But a cartoon style, it does all the heavy lifting for you. It just strips away all the visual noise, which lowers that mental friction and lets you get the point of the ad almost instantly. Okay, but there's another, even weirder psychological hurdle that realism has to deal with. It's something called the uncanny valley. And for any art style trying to perfectly copy reality, this is a massive, massive risk. And here's the deal with that. When something looks almost human, but there's just something not quite right, our brains don't register it as impressive. We register it as creepy. It creates this weird feeling of discomfort that makes you want to look away, which is, of course, the absolute last thing an advertiser wants. Cartoon art, on the other hand, just completely sidesteps this entire problem. It isn't trying to be real, so it can't feel off. Instead, it sends a totally different signal to your brain. This is fun. This is an escape. This is low-stakes enjoyment. When a cartoon character does something physically impossible, our brain just goes with it. If a realistic character did the same thing, we'd probably just think the game was broken. All right, so we've got the psychology down, but now let's get into the second part of this whole equation. Because this art style isn't just about what you see, it's about what you feel. And trust me, that feeling is very, very carefully engineered. A huge piece of this puzzle is a classic animation trick called squash and stretch. Think about it. When a cartoon character hits a wall, they don't just stop cold. No, they squash down and then spring back. This adds a sense of weight and impact, a satisfying feeling that animators call juice, and it makes the action feel so much more alive and tactile than rigid realism ever could. And it's the exact same story when it comes to emotion. A realistic character might show surprise by, slightly widening their eyes. A cartoon character, their eyes can literally pop halfway across the screen. Sure, it's exaggerated, but it gets the emotion across in a fraction of a second to someone who's just about to scroll past. Now look, beyond all the brain science and the cool animation tricks, there's a super practical, almost brutally simple reason for all of this. In the digital ad world, every millisecond counts. Latency is the ultimate enemy. Speed is king. So, this chart really breaks it down perfectly. Cartoonish art uses smaller, simpler files. That means the ad loads in a flash, even if you're on a terrible connection. Realism, it uses these massive, heavy files that can lag and stutter. And this also means cartoon styles work on pretty much any phone out there, while realistic art might just look cheap or broken on older, less powerful devices. So we've talked about the psychology, the animation, the tech specs. What does it all boil down to? Well, it all points to one single unifying idea. And here it is. The goal was never realism. The goal is simply to minimize friction. That's it. The entire game is about removing every single possible barrier, visual, mental, and technical, that stands between you seeing an ad and you tapping that install button.
But, and this is so important to remember, this idea of friction goes way, way beyond just the art style. The art might be perfect and get you that initial click, but if the game itself is full of confusing menus, annoying pop-ups, and way too many ads, well, you've just created a whole new kind of friction that's going to drive that player away.
At the end of the day, that's really the big takeaway, isn't it? The art style is the hook. It's the brilliant invitation that gets someone to show up to the party. But it's the clean, intuitive, and respectful user experience that's what actually makes them decide to stay. So the next time you see one of those ads pop up in your feed, think about this. The company behind it has absolutely mastered the art of getting your click. But the real question is, have they actually done the hard work to earn you as a player for the long haul?